Fighting in the southern Philippines between government security forces and an ISIL-inspired armed group called Maote is taking a toll on citizens in the Marawi city. Now, around 80,000 people have fled the city, but who exactly are the Maote?
We'll try to answer that during today's program, but first, we have this latest report on the rescue operation from Marawi City, where our correspondent has been embedded with government forces.
We are on our way with a rescue team to a place called Bangon, a critical battleground in the heart of Marawi City. They're in a hurry. 5 people need to be moved from their homes, and snipers are around.
Now they're trying to rescue 2 more women who are too traumatized or too weak, in fact, to even get out of the house. They've been stuck here for almost 8 days now. The situation is quite tense.
After a few minutes, the residents ventured out. Then we are off to a second location. Abdul Halim Lumipaw is 102 years old. His entire family fled when fighting started, but not him. He is too old. This is the human cost of war with the Maote. Almost 2,000 people have been trapped by the fighting that has been dragging in central Mindanao for over a week now. More than 100 people have been killed, and the total continues to rise. The Maote group seized control of several parts of Marawi City. Fighters pledge allegiance to ISIL in their campaign to set up an Islamic State in Lanao province. The Philippine military says despite a continuous offensive against about 60 Maote members, efforts to rescue trapped people remains a priority. President Rodrigo Duterte imposed martial law across the Mindanao region last week, where the situation is confusing. State forces are in control, but no one can say for sure who has the final say when it comes to giving access to Marawi City Center. Rescuers say they're prepared to die.
We want to save the people of Marawi. If we have to face the bullets, if we have to die, then so be it.
The rescued are taken to hospital. Others are too shocked to talk about their ordeal. Some of the injured are attended to. Women, children, caught up in the fighting they have little to do with. Some bear invisible wounds and will take longer to heal.
For the latest on the crisis in Marawi City, Jamila Alindogan joins us from the Iligan city, where evacuees from the fighting in Marawi have fled. We also have Richard Javid Hedarian. He teaches political science at De La Salle University in Manila, that's the capital. Zia Alonto Adiong is an assemblyman for the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao, where Marawi is located. And Tom Smith is a lecturer in the UK at the University of Portsmouth. He specialises in political violence in Southeast Asia. It's good to have you here, everybody. Jamila, was there one story that has stuck in your mind from your reporting and looking at the rescues and conditions of people on the ground in Marawi?
Well, of course, the one that I just filed is something that affected me deeply, because you do see the impact of war and also of a conflict that keeps on delaying. I mean, the siege has been going on for over a week. The military claims that they do have 90% control of the areas in Marawi, but then there are still hundreds of people still trapped. And then when you see their situation when they haven't eaten for days and they're living trauma, and there's one girl, Fatima, in that first video, she jumped and she just let go. The rescuers were able to catch her. She was in the car with me, and she opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She was just in tears, and her hands were icy. And you know, when you see that, it's quite difficult to process. And also during the other day, we went into another area where they were retrieving bodies. That's Fatima, and you see bodies rotting for days, and they have been unidentified. And the major problem also is that in Marawi, there's really no more gore forensics. So, you have families who have fled and their loved ones stuck. They don't know if they're alive. They don't know if they've been dead. So, all of these human cost is difficult as a journalist as well.
I want to share a story from someone else who's in the Philippines. This is Janena, and she sent us this via Twitter. She says, "We've been receiving information that the rebels are staying near our house. The government army have not yet penetrated that area." She goes on to say, "My family has evacuated to Iligan, the city where Jamila is speaking from. My fear is that our house might be hit by an airstrike because the rebels are still staying near our house." Zia, I know that these airstrikes for something that were of a concern for you, and you spoke to government forces to tell them to stop using that as a tactic. Has it stopped?
That's correct. Yeah. Actually, one of the things that we appeal before the government is to launch a military attack that would be suitable to the densely populated area in Marawi City. You see, the heart of Marawi City is where the Maute group are visibly seen, and their movement are not limited to. Meaning to say, these are the area that are jam-packed with houses, with buildings. And if you strike that, if you go into an offensive, military offensive, using an airstrike, the cost of human lives would be damaging, not only to the properties, but also to the human lives. But aside from this, we would like also to know that the Maute group does not even qualify to be a rebel group. It is a nascent group. It's a militant organization that is fashioning themselves as the Islamic State in the Levant. And so we do not treat them actually as a rebel group as compared to the Moro National Liberation Front in the past, and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, where the government is now having a peace negotiation, a peace process with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. And on the other hand, the Moro National Liberation Front already signed a peace agreement with the government. So you see, this is purely terrorism causing havoc in our streets. The reason why I define that in one word as chaotic and traumatic, because this is the first time, in fact, not only in Marawi City, but the entire Philippines, that this is the first time that we saw a human damage, a cost of lives with no regard to human lives.
About underestimating these guys. I mean, they've taken hold of a city of 200,000 people. Regular population is obviously going to be much reduced in the future, and depending on the damage that Marawi has suffered. But by effectively the Maute joining up with the Abu Sayyaf and maybe other militant groups, even though we thought these guys only had a couple of hundred strong, they're the amount of impact they can have in an urban environment has obviously caught the military and security forces napping somewhat.
Let me just bring in Richard. Richard, how's the rest of the Philippines looking at what's happening in Marawi City? Are they seeing this as, I hate to use the term, everyday violence, or is it specific armed group? Are they creating a ripple in an area where there are a number of armed groups?
Well, of course, the academic in me is going to say that let's wait for the scientific surveys to come out before we make a judgment. But what I can say at this point in time is that one of the most troubling aspects of the coverage and public perception of the crisis in Marawi is this fog of disinformation. You have a lot of propagandists, a lot of trolls online. I and Jamila have been targeted by them over the past few days for just raising some basic questions and trying to have an objective coverage of the issue. So it's very difficult to really have an accurate and objective pulse of where the public stands. Nonetheless, based on my own reading of comments online, based on my own interaction with people online and offline, it seems that there is a significant section of the society that feels that martial law, albeit a draconian measure, was the only way forward because the president of the Philippines needs maximum possible legal leeway to deal with this crisis, and that Mindanao is getting completely out of control. And much of the political establishment, including the Congress, the Senate, and even a lot of people in the intelligentsia are saying maybe President Duterte really had to declare this martial law. So at this point in time, I don't see a very concerted pushback against the declaration of martial law. And I think that has to partly do with the fact that there's this fear that we're not only dealing with perhaps the specter of Marcosian authoritarianism because of Duterte's declaration of martial law, but we're finally dealing with ISIS in its newest incarnation.
And I think at that point we do need to question
Jamila, you go first. Tom, you go second. Jamila, go ahead.
The challenge here is to try, yes, Richard was correct, to try to sift through the propaganda, but also to try to educate the rest of the country who always have misconceptions about Mindanao. You know, if you look at the President Duterte is from Mindanao. He claims to have Maranao lineage, which is, you know, those who live in Marawi and Lanao del province. And yet, he did not hesitate to implement martial law. If you look at history in Mindanao, it is not the first time that martial law is implemented. And the martial laws that were implemented, especially during the time of Marcos, was the bloodiest in history. And when you do that, and that martial law declaration in 1970s is actually what led to the rebellion in Mindanao. And, you know, for the rest of the country, they always have this impression that, you know, Mindanao is absolutely dangerous and that Moro Muslims are violent. And as a journalist, we have to challenge that notion. We have to change that preconceived notion. There are dangerous pockets, and all of these violence is really seeped through historical injustices, you know, on the ground, economic depravity, social injustice, marginalization. And of course, one major important factor here is arms. The Mindanao is rife with weapons, you know, and this is a major problem. And through peace process, if the government will just live up to the peace process,
I think
and
Jamila
actually
is
make
right,
sure
but what we need to talk about. What we need to talk about is the ISIS branding which is going on in the coverage. Whether that
Zia,
is...
hold tight for a moment. Zia, we can't see you. We can hear you on the phone. I know it's a little tricky for you, but hold tight for a moment. And we'll bring you back in. Tom, finish your thought very briefly.
Sure, yeah. So we need to talk about the ISIS coverage, which linking the militants, the Maute group, the Abu Sayyaf, constantly to ISIS, grabs our attention and it makes for great headlines. But there's very little evidence that there is much of a physical or a direct connection between ISIS Central in the Middle East and what's going on in the Philippines. It obviously makes a great deal of sense for the Maute group and the Abu Sayyaf to use the flag of ISIS in their training videos and propaganda to effectively raise their profile. But as for evidence of transfers of arms or money or personnel between one group or the other, we don't have that.
So I wanted to bring in a little perspective online from people who are from the region on what they think of this group, the Maute. This is Alex. He says, the Maute are Maranao native. We've been hearing that name since the 90s, and they've been engaged with different illegal transnational crimes, and now they're engaged with, this person says, ISIS or ISIL. Another person writes in saying they were an unheard of group until the president challenged them last year to attack Marawi, and he's referring to a report here from the news station ABS-CBN News, in which Duterte dared Maute group to attack Marawi in a December 2016 speech. Zia, can you give us some context here for this?
Well, first and foremost, I'd like to go back on the issue of martial law. You see, martial law in the past is different from the martial law that is declared by President Duterte. You put it in the context of the situation right now in Marawi City. You see, in the 70s, when President Marcos declared martial law, it was purely to perpetuate himself in power. Number two, the martial law that was in the 1935 Constitution was very sweeping, giving powers to the office of the president.
Okay, Zia, I'm going to ask you to bring us up to date because we only have so much time and I don't have time for all of the historical context. Tell us about, Zia, hold tight for a moment because I've only got a little bit of time and we've got a lot of community who also want to talk to you as well. What is the practical, down on the ground experience of living under martial law in Marawi right now? What is the curfew like? What is the life like? You're right there. Tell us.
Actually, aside from this crisis that is happening, this is going on, there's a real human drama, unfolding of real human drama. You see, many of the media were saying, or even the people on trolls and online are saying that these Maranaos and Muslims are barbaric and they do anything to destroy any area. But you see, it's different. The Maute group intends to sow hatred between the Muslim residents and the Christian residents in the city. They want to highlight,
Zia, you're in Marawi City. Martial law is like what?
Yeah, sectarian. Martial law in Marawi City I think the president declares martial law. It may not be the perfect solution. It's the practical one because it's a practical one because as a commander in chief of the Philippine Army, he has to contain the situation from spilling it over to the other neighboring cities and regions.
Jamila, go ahead.
From what I gathered, majority of those who are in Lanao province are actually supportive of martial law. But the question here is why did the president implement martial law all across the Mindanao region? What about the other parts of Mindanao that are not really dealing with such, so this is the major criticism of that. And this is what the president has to answer when he finally convenes.
Indeed, I'm not convinced that martial law.
We're talking about terrorism here.
I'm not convinced that martial law has any instrumental impact, other than legally, like Richard says, protecting the soldiers from perhaps raping people, as Duterte joked. I mean, this sort of hyperbole and jokes which he offers out are not obviously productive at this time. And so when he threatens that the Visayas and the north of the Philippines will be next for martial law, people are worried, and I think legitimately so. But there was no real reason why the military couldn't surround Marawi and effectively choke the insurgents. Why martial law was needed, I don't think anybody's really articulated exactly the value of that yet.
Richard, I want to bring you in here because we haven't heard your voice in a minute with this Facebook comment. This is Wesley who says, Marawi is no stranger to conflict, something we've heard all of our panelists say, but still the size of the attacking force, the rapidity of the attack, the way they caught local security forces by surprise, and the damage they inflicted was, to me, surprising. And Wesley is speaking from Manila. Was it surprising to you, or is this something that you think security forces should have been aware about?
Well, I mean, as early as February, in an op-ed for Al Jazeera, was warning that there's going to be a new round of conflict in Mindanao unless President Duterte, a little bit a little bit diversifies from his single focus on the issue of war and drugs, and also with these peace negotiations with the communists. So I'm not totally surprised. I mean, we know that the operation was some kind of an opportunistic kind of revenge operation. It came shortly after there was a failed raid on the safe house of Isnalin Hapilon, who's the leader of the Abu Sayyaf and was designated last April by ISIS command as the emir of ISIS affiliate groups here in the Philippines. And then, of course, you had the situation whereby not only the president, but the defense minister, the military chief of staff, the national security advisor, almost the bulk of the defense establishment leaders were all the way in Moscow. So I think the Maute group felt that this is the perfect opportunity not only to launch a revenge attack, but to take the government by surprise. And I think everyone was really surprised by the rapidity of this.
Jamila, go ahead.
I am not at all surprised about the martial law declaration. From my coverage of Mindanao since last year, we've been hearing this, and even my sources were saying that some areas have been configured for martial law declaration. That it happened in Lanao province was just a little bit. That was what was quite surprising. Although we know that there has always been threat with the Maute. They battled the Maute last year several times. The military already claimed that they have managed to defeat them, and now they came back stronger. So it's always a security issue.
Jamila, yes. I want to play something. This is you embedded with government troops a few days ago. Have a look at this. I want to ask you something very specific about the Maute. Have a look.
We traveled to the heart of Marawi. Its streets have now become a battleground.
We're now embedded with state forces as they get to one of those areas cleared and recently recovered by the Philippine military. Even if the areas are mostly cleared, there are still snipers positioned everywhere. So we're told to basically walk briskly, but also prepare to run if we have to. We just had a little encounter here.
Jamila, we boldly promised our audience that we would explain who the Maute are as a group. What do they want? Can you help us do that?
Well, basically, they started as a sort of, they come from, Maute is a last name of a powerful political clan in Lanao province. And initially, they started as a militia, but these two brothers have been educated in the Middle East. And just like any other rebel leader or leader of an armed group in the Philippines, that studied abroad, they came back with very different notions. The threat of the Maute has been discussed as early as 2013. I remembered going there in Mindanao early 2014, and somebody told me that there's this small little group of young people trying to imitate ISIS and that the military was in denial for so long. One of the major reasons back then, during the time of President Aquino, was that the peace process with the MILF was the priority. And to actually bring about a threat of an ISIS little group might mean scaling back on the socio-economic plans of this part of the province. So we saw this grew to a bit more radical. But what really, I think, from my observation, what really made it grow was the alliance with the Abu Sayyaf, especially the one from Basilan,
Yeah, I'd agree
another
with
outlying
that.
island in the
The
southern
alliance is new.
Philippines. And that
The alliance
really
is
brought
new.
in the influence after they pledged allegiance. And this is a major issue. What we're hearing on the ground from locals who have access to Maute is that there is infighting within the Maute because although it may have been started by the Maranao clan or tribe, they have now been outnumbered by those coming from other tribes who have different experiences when it comes to combat, who are wreaking havoc in an area that's not entirely their own hometown. So we're seeing that conflict again, going back to a tribal conflict. Yes, Sammy.
Well, how that havoc is playing out for people on the ground is what we're seeing. This is Amina, who wrote this Facebook post saying, most people in Marawi don't have a car. My sister, who lives in Iligan, worked hard to find a car for hire. She took it to Marawi, but only 10 of my family members were able to get in the car, and they were packed like sardines. My niece was left behind, and I asked her, why her and not her brother? My sister said because the Maute are forcing teenage boys to carry arms for them. So Zia, we hear this allegation of child soldiers, and of course it's something that Jamila has also covered on the network. But what happens for the people who are left behind? What comes next for this person's niece who is still in Marawi?
Yeah, once the military declares the area, because there's only 15% of the area that has to be penetrated by the military to occupy this area. These areas are then identified to have a high visibility of Maute. So once the Philippine Army, the AFP, recovers this area, that's the time that we will be able to get into this area and then rescue those residents that are trapped in these areas. They're amounted to about 2,000 residents trapped inside these areas. But as to the area, as to the whole of Marawi City, those that have declared safe by the Philippine military, all the residents have already transported to Iligan City to safety, and most of them are now housed in evacuation centers. Most of them are living with their kids and their relatives in Iligan City, in Cagayan de Oro City. So you see, when we talk about martial law, we put it in this context. You see, this terrorism knows boundaries, and I believe President Duterte, it might not be perfect, I said, it might be radical action, but if you put it into this context, terrorism knows boundaries, and the fear that this crisis might spill over to other areas is actually a paramount concern.
Isn't the conflict also
Commander-in-Chief of the Philippine Army to avoid any kind of incident that may happen? No? And
isn't the conflict also based on the clan-based warfare and the overlapping clans and relationships that are inherently violent in Mindanao and other regions of the Philippines, which needs addressing? The poverty, which was just discussed in that Facebook post, which is now causing all sorts of problems as the siege continues, is one of the root causes. The systemic levels of poverty and corruption are the problems which need to be tackled. Now, Duterte has a policy of federalism to federalize the country, but that, in essence, could risk making these local warlords even more powerful and legitimizing them.
I want to get back to where we started. This is Amerigo on Facebook. This post actually went viral where locals were actually helping people who were fleeing from Marawi City and offering them free water, free food, and helping rescue them as much as they were able to. Malika, where do you want to leave us before we go online?
A sad human story. This is Kay Mambuay, who says, I'm 3 hours away from Marawi. We have families there. A lot of civilians will not have a home after this. It's either burned by the terrorists, as she says, or destroyed by air raids.
Now, that's all the time we have right now, but I'm taking our guests online. To join our conversation in our post show, you need to go to stream.aljazeera.com. We will see you there. Jamila, Richard, Zia, Tom, see you in a moment. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hello again. We're talking about the crisis in Marawi in the southern Philippines. I was going to ask our guests, when do they think martial law will be over? But I'm not going to do that because I'm going to actually do it via President Duterte in his own words. So let's have a listen, see what he said.
I had to declare martial law in the Mindanao group of islands for a period not exceeding 60 days, effective as of May 23, 2017. After the police and the military will tell me that everything is stabilized. So maybe from another 60 days, I will ask, give me enough time to stabilize and to solve the allied problems so can we have a peaceful, we can move on. I have no other recourse but to declare martial law. When will it end? I do not know. Hanggang hindi sinabi ng police, pati armed forces, na safe na ang Philippines. This
So what I got was 60 days until things are stable, until things are safe. I don't know. Guess. Maybe you can add a little more clarity to that. I just want to get your closing thoughts here on how long do you think this situation might last? Jamila, you're right there on the ground. What do you think?
When the president talks about stability, he needs to be specific about what sort of stability is pertaining to. He may be able to crush Maute, but then what would be left of Marawi? What would be left of the human toll, the impact, the things that you cannot quantify? Stability is also economic security. It's human security. That could last for 20 years. That could last 10 days. What is important, though, is that this martial law is ratified or seen as legal. Because right now, without the joint session by Congress, it is actually going to be seen as unconstitutional and illegal. So, the president has to be very specific when he talks about stability. It can go very different ways. There are many different versions of it.
Richard, thoughts?
Well, I mean, first of all, we have to consider the fact that based on the reports, the military top brass actually told the president that a martial law may not even be necessary. That was told by Army Chief of Staff, Mr. Onyo, when he was in Moscow. And then the other day, Secretary of Defense Lorenzana also said in a hearing in the Senate that that's not necessary. Now, I talked to the military people. I was just talking to the Defense Minister Lorenzana yesterday, and he told me that they're going to make sure that although martial law sounds scary, in operation, in terms of implementation, they're going to make sure that this doesn't trample upon the basic constitutional rights of the citizens. So it shows that the military is not too excited even about the idea of a martial law all across Mindanao, and I'm sure they're more reluctant if this is going to be extended.
Well, the military is already stretched thin, right?
Exactly. Tom is correct about that.
The military is already stretched
so many fronts.
very thin. They're fighting on a number of fronts. I mean, Duterte's got them, the poor old military, mopping up the dirty war on drugs, which has, has become an obvious failure on the part of the National Police Force. And it's been well reported the problems there, and he's brought in the military to clean that up. So they're doing that as well as fighting a resurgent communist insurgency and all these other Islamist insurgents.
But
so
Tom,
to declare martial law across Mindanao.
The other issue is that if they're so focused on internal security, what happens to improving defense security externally with the threat of China doing incursions in the South China Sea? Nobody knows what's happening there now. Most of the resources have been focused in Lanao, and nobody knows how long. So it's actually going to be bad for the military in the long run because they're stretched and they're battling so many fronts. So Tom is completely correct about that.
All right, so let me just bring in Zia here, guests. Hold tight for a moment. Let me just bring in Zia here. Zia, there's something that I noticed on your Twitter timeline, and it says here, let it be known that Muslim residents remain in their homes despite airstrikes, choosing danger than leaving their Christian employees behind. This is not something that we got to in the main show, Zia, but you found it important enough to share it with people who were following you. Why?
Yeah, it's a remarkable story. It's actually what I've said earlier. It's unfolding. What we're witnessing here is an unfolding of a human drama. You see, many Muslims here do not want to leave the Christians behind. Actually, it's contrary to what the ISIS or the Maute wants to create. Like, they want to make it as a sectarian conflict. But contrary to that, as opposed to what they want, the Maranao people, the Muslims residents in the city, actually showed the opposite of what the Maute really want. and they even show to the world that only through religion, the religion of peace, Islam and Christianity, is actually the common denominator that puts people to believe in human dignity. And it's actually a human drama, because you see a lot of Muslim residents here in the city protecting the Christians.
I think more for the argument than for social cohesion.
Tom, hold tight a minute.
And then return back here. And then return back here to Marawi because they couldn't afford to leave the Christians behind. So that is actually one of the remarkable things that that we see right now. Contrary also to many of the things that I've said, that Muslims in the Philippines, the Marawi people are barbaric, and it's actually an anathema of that kind of stigma. So you see, many people here, do declare that they want to have peace in our area, and the only thing for us to ensure peace is really for the president to do whatever he takes in order to minimize and contain this crisis that is happening right now. As I've said, the multi-group is different from the two moral fronts because, number one, they don't have the legal cause, they don't have the advocacy to begin with. These are purely terrorist activities, terrorist militant groups who are fashioning themselves after the Islamic State and the Levant. So the only way for the
this kind of proves to me that
okay, Zia, Tom wants to respond. Give me a moment, because I want you to actually have that conversation together. I'm almost at the end of the show, so Tom, be brief. Go ahead.
Yeah, what this kind of proves to me is that the social cohesion, which is desperately needed in Mindanao for a long, sustainable peace, is there in nascent forms. But Duterte needs to support that. And you think the most easy way for him to support that would be saying martial law is going to be here for a very limited time. We're going to get rid of this problem, and then it'll be back to normal, and you will get on with our lives and be development. But this open-ended threat of vagueness is not good.
We're going to wrap up the conversation
also, I think
what
is important.
I should have taken that pause. I was too late. I'm actually going to put a pause on that conversation for now. You are all online, so I know we're going to continue that conversation with our online community as well. Use hashtag AJStream. Before we wrap, though, Malika.
I'll end with two different viewpoints that kind of represent what we're seeing online from people on the current status of martial law and what it means for people there. This is Maya in a Facebook post that went viral online. She says, "We are tired of having to deal with these armed groups. We want a real end to this. That's why we voted for this president. So if we have to sacrifice a little of our personal freedom, if we have to adhere to our curfew, if we have to cooperate with the military, we're prepared. We've done this a million times before. You think your complaints are saving us? They're not." Now, this is Maya in New York City who says she has family in Mindanao. But on the other hand, someone in the Philippines says privileged people in Mindanao say the military presence is okay because they feel safe. I wonder if the indigenous people and the evacuees feel the same way.
So thank you to Tom. Props to Zia and Richard and Jamila, who are up in the early hours of the morning. You would not know it from their debating ability. Jamila, what's your next story? When will we see you next?
Oh, God, I have no idea. Tomorrow we'll have to get up early and see what's happened overnight during airstrikes.
All right. We'll be following with great interest. Thank you very much, guests. We really appreciate your time on the stream today. Take care, everybody.